Maybe you've heard the word stoic. Maybe it brings to mind the image of someone cold, unmoved, emotionless, needing no one, and unshaken by anything. But if you've ever had a day that felt wrong yet still had to pretend everything was right, if you've ever felt so tired you didn't even know where to begin again, if you've ever asked yourself, "Who am I?" when there's nothing left to prove, then maybe you need to know that Stoicism is not a philosophy to be memorized. It is a place you return to whenever the outside world becomes too loud. To a Stoic, strength doesn't come from victory. It comes from the ability to hold on to your inner dignity, even when you've lost everything on the outside. They don't reject emotion. They simply refuse to let emotion drive the wheel. They don't need the world to soften before they find peace. They only need to know what is theirs to control and what must be let go. Marcus Aurelius wrote his journals in the midst of war. Seneca wrote letters through seasons of grief. Epictetus taught in a broken body. They didn't use philosophy to run away. They used it to stay, to face, and to move forward. In this video, you will see Stoicism doesn't ask you to become the ideal version of yourself. It doesn't force you to hold it all together. It doesn't teach you how to win. It doesn't tell you to stay positive all the time. It simply invites you to return to a calmer mind, to a heart no longer manipulated, and to a life that doesn't need to be perfect to still be deeply worth living. Maybe you don't need anyone to rescue you. You just need somewhere to stand when you no longer know what to hold on to. And maybe Stoicism is that place. 1. Forged in fire. A philosophy born not from lectures, but from loss. If one day you lost everything, your job, your money, your loved ones, your reputation, what would be left of you? And if there was nothing left to hold on to, would you still remember how to stand? That's not a philosophical question. It's a real-life situation that one man had to face more than 2,000 years ago. Zeno of Citiuma, wealthy merchant from the island of Cyprus, lost everything in a shipwreck. He washed ashore in Athens with empty hands, an empty mind, and a life that no longer felt like it belonged to him. No one taught him how to move on. There was no healing course, no podcast, only the silence of a foreign city and a small bookstore where he happened to read about Socrates. From that moment on, he began a journey to find something within something the sea could never wash away. And from that journey, one of the strongest philosophies ever created was born, Stoicism. Unlike many other ancient schools that centered on debates, theory, and systems of thought, Stoicism was never made to be argued. It was made to be lived. It wasn't built for those who wanted to seem wise. It was built for those who wanted to survive adversity without losing their dignity. And just like Zeno himself, those who came after him did not begin from peace. They began from a kind of deep loss, but instead of breaking, they turned inward and found a place the world could never touch. Stoicism is an ancient Greco-Roman philosophy born around the 3rd century BC in Athens and later spreading through the Roman Empire. From lectures by the painted porch, Stoa poikile, from which Stoicism gets its name, to the quiet chambers of imperial palaces, Stoicism became a foundation of thought for people from all walks of life, from slaves and merchants to emperors holding entire empires in their hands. There was no single mold for the Stoic. There was only one common thread. They had all stood in the middle of chaos, and instead of falling apart, they chose to stand still. Epictetus was a crippled slave. He never wrote books. He simply spoke in a small room to students, seeking direction in the dark corners of their lives. Seneca was a statesman, a writer, wading through the murky waters of Roman politics while writing about virtue, restraint, and death as if it were an old companion, Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful emperor of his time, sat down each night to write a journal not for others, but for himself, reminders of what truly matters. They were not invincible statues. They were human. But they were humans who learned how to master themselves while the world tried to master them. What united them was not their circumstances, but their ability to remain clear-minded even when the world around them collapsed. They didn't try to control everything. They simply learned to control their response, not led by emotion, not manipulated by conditions. They chose to slow down, observe, and act from a place of calm awareness. And from that place, they discovered a kind of freedom that no force could take away. Stoicism is not a success formula. It doesn't promise you more money or less pain. What it gives you is a strong inner framework so that when pain arrives, you don't break. When loss comes, you don't collapse. And when everything you used to depend on disappears, you still have one thing left: you. Not the you of achievements, but the you of stillness, depth, and quiet resilience. That's why Stoicism has never been a philosophy to argue about. It's a philosophy to live by, to stand upon, and to hold on to yourself, no matter how much the world around you changes. 2. Control versus chaos. Knowing what you can control and what you must let go. After realizing that Stoicism didn't begin with theory, but from a life shattered and held together by will, the next question almost appears on its own. How do you stay grounded in a world that constantly changes, when the only thing that doesn't shift is yourself? To the Stoic, the answer doesn't lie in controlling everything. It lies in clearly distinguishing what must be held and what must be released. Epictetus, a man who spent nearly half of his life as a slave, built an entire system of thought on this principle. He divided the world into two parts, one you can control and one you cannot. And yet, it is this simplicity that marks the beginning of an inner revolution, because most of us blur that line. We react fiercely to words that don't belong to us. We fall into despair over outcomes that don't follow our wishes. We blame ourselves for other people's emotions, and in the end we lose the only freedom that truly matters, the ability to govern our own response. You cannot control how long someone chooses to love you. You cannot hold on to a promise someone has already forgotten. You cannot predict the shifting of time or stop a sudden illness from arriving, but you can always control your attitude. You can always adjust your behavior. You can choose silence instead of arguing. Choose honesty instead of flattery. Choose steadiness instead of letting emotion drag you away. To the Stoic, this isn't indifference, this is awareness. It is the ability to stay still in turbulent waves without trying to command the ocean. They are not stuck in the illusion of control, nor do they surrender their lives to fate. They live in a very special position between acceptance and initiative. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of the Roman Empire, and a man who wrote diaries for his own soul, once quietly reminded himself each day, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Strength does not come from submitting to circumstances. It comes from not allowing circumstances to conquer you. When you master your response, you reclaim inner sovereignty. When you no longer let temporary emotions control lasting behavior, you become free. And when you know what you're holding and what you're releasing, life becomes lighter without needing to change. The human mind, if left untrained, is like a kite in heavy wind, ready to fly away, tangled, frantic. But someone who lives by Stoicism is different. They know when to hold the string and when to let it go. They understand that real control doesn't come from tightening the grip, but from seeing clearly. And sometimes, The very moment you let go of something that no longer belongs to you was when you finally begin to feel lighter. 3. Stillness in overstimulation. Finding calm in an age that demands happiness. What would happen if you no longer had to be positive all the time? If you no longer had to smile while your heart was breaking? No longer had to post bright pictures when your mind was filled with shadows? No longer had to think positive, be grateful every day, or turn pain into purpose just to feel like you still belong? We live in an age where happiness has become a kind of obligation. On social media, everyone is doing fine. Everyone is moving forward. Everyone seems to be living a life with goals, with purpose, with their own unique path. But behind those lights is a generation exhausted from having to hold up the image of positivity. Each person is carrying a hidden mental mask. The successful are afraid of slipping, the cheerful are afraid of falling, and those who have it all are afraid to admit they feel empty. And that is precisely why Stoicism returns like a breath that swims against the current. Not because it teaches you how to escape sadness, but because it allows you to be sad without being consumed by it. Not because it helps you avoid emotions, but because it offers you space to sit with pain and learn from it, without panic, without judgment, without rushing to move on. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them." He did not write to hide from fear, but to face it head-on. In letters to his friends, he spoke of sleepless nights, of death always nearby, and of the exhaustion that comes from bearing a mind constantly tested. But instead of denying it, he observed it, he recorded it. Every line he wrote was not to soothe, but to discipline, not to silence emotion, but to walk through it with awareness. Marcus Aurelius, in the middle of hundreds of life or death decisions each day, kept the nightly ritual of journaling, not to complain, but to calm his inner world. On a night when pain gripped him so strongly he could no longer stand, he simply wrote, "This body no longer obeys me, but my mind still does." He didn't complain. He didn't look for a reason to delay his duty. He simply became still to remember that even if the body fails, the mind remains the last thing he could still command. Epictetus didn't teach like someone immune to suffering. He spoke to his students as people in pain, afraid, despairing. But instead of offering empty words to soothe them, he simply asked, "If it's not in your hands, then why do you give it the power to destroy your mind?" That question wasn't theoretical. It was a wake-up call, another form of awakening. To the Stoic, emotion is not the enemy, but letting emotion dictate behavior that is surrender. And so they learned to sit still in the storm, not because they were numb, but because they understood that true peace doesn't come from silencing the chaos, but from learning how to keep the oars steady. And in a world overwhelmed by noise, by content, by expectations, by definitions of happiness, stillness has become a form of strength, quiet, invisible, but when found, it sets you free from needing external validation to feel enough. Stoicism offers you that space, a space where you don't have to be strong, where you can admit you're tired, burnt out, directionless, and then, instead of rushing to find yourself again through some idealized version of who you think you should be, you're gently invited to return to being human before you try to become anything greater. Because sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to sit quietly with yourself. 4. The strength to feel. Stoics are not emotionless. They are strong enough not to be ruled by emotion. There is a very common misunderstanding about Stoicism, that if you follow it, you'll become emotionless, cold, unmoving, untouchable. You won't cry, you won't love, you won't feel pain. like a machine that knows how to think, but not how to feel. The truth is the opposite. A Stoic does not try to become stone. They simply learn how not to be thrown off course by the waves of the heart, because emotion, matter how powerful, is not wrong. What's dangerous is not that you feel angry or heartbroken or desperate. What's dangerous is when those emotions start driving you and you no longer hold the wheel. To a Stoic, emotion is a natural part of life, but behavior reaction choices where we are called to be fully present. You can be angry, you can be sad, you can feel shattered, but in that very moment, if you can still remain aware enough not to hurt anyone, not to betray yourself, not to say something that can't be taken back, then that is not numbness. That is strength. The Stoic soldier is not the one who doesn't tremble in the storm. They tremble. They feel the cold. They may fall apart inside 100 times, but still they rise. Still they keep walking, not because they are fearless, but because they have learned to walk with fear, without letting it decide where they go. Marcus Aurelius once wrote heavy words after the death of a son he deeply loved. He did not deny his grief, but he also did not let mourning turn him bitter. In Meditations, he quietly recorded, "Life is alone. What was once given can also be taken away. No tragedy, no vengeance. Only a deeply human, deeply knowing, and deeply emotional acceptance." Seneca lost more than a few loved ones, but he did not hide his pain beneath reason. In many letters he spoke of long nights, of moments when he felt too weak. But then he wrote on, "Though we do not choose what happens, we always choose how to respond." He still suffered, but he never let the pain decide who he would become because of it. To the Stoic, strength is not in never crying. It is in knowing how to live even after the tears. Not in avoiding emotion, but in not living under its rule. Not letting sadness drown your values. Not letting anger turn into poison. Just looking into the emotion, calling it by its true name, and letting it pass without letting it carry you away. Because in the end, strength isn't in a calm face. It is in a mind that has touched the bottom of sorrow, yet still remains clear enough to protect the most decent part of itself. 5. Practice without preaching. Begin with small exercises. Live Stoic without quoting Latin. Have you ever had a day like this? Your mind spins without rest. You scroll through your phone but see nothing. You sit in front of your work screen, but your thoughts drift to things that have nothing to do with it. It feels like everything is moving, and you can't hold on to yourself. You want to stay calm, but the more you try to control it, the more you lose direction. In moments like that, Stoicism doesn't arrive as a lecture. It comes as a soft touch on the shoulder, as if someone is gently whispering, "Slow down, look again, try another way." The Stoic doesn't live to impress. They don't use philosophy to present themselves. They simply live. Simply, steadily, and most importantly, practically. You don't need to quote Marcus or understand ancient Roman. You only need to begin with these 3 simple practice-small habits, but strong enough to change the way you see your life. The first practice, negative visualization. Imagine losing something you currently have. Not to dramatize it, but to feel grateful. One morning as you wake up, try thinking, what if today were the last time I ever hear the voice of someone I love? Not to feel sorrow, but to feel appreciation. Not to create fear, but to live more fully in each moment. When you do this, you'll begin to see what you have now may not always be there. And that awareness alone helps you show up more fully, love more deeply, and be more kind. The second practice, daily Stoic journaling. Not to record your life, but to reflect on how you responded to it. Every night, before you sleep, try answering 3 questions. What happened today that I couldn't control? How did I respond? And if I could do it again, how would I choose to respond differently? This is not self-criticism, it is self-training. A way for you to not just go through life, but to go through it with awareness. The third practice, voluntary discomfort. Deliberately do something uncomfortable to train resilience, like taking a cold shower, skipping a meal, walking instead of driving. Not out of asceticism, but to remind yourself you don't need everything to be easy in order to survive, and that you are stronger than the comfort you've gotten used to. You can carry these 3 practices into every part of life. When you feel unsteady in love, try sitting down and writing about the emotion instead of reacting. When your family hurts you, try imagining they're gone tomorrow. How would you want to treat them today? When work exhausts you, try voluntarily choosing a small inconvenience just to remember that you're still the one choosing. Stoicism doesn't demand you understand every principle. It only asks that you be brave enough to slow down a little, to not react too quickly, to feel more gratitude, and to stop waiting for the world to be perfect before you allow yourself to feel okay. You don't have to be a philosopher, only someone learning how to return inward before rushing outward. Like turning a wheel, you don't need to push with great force to change everything. Just shift gently at the center, and the whole direction will begin to change. And if you still wonder, can changes this small really create a different life? Then maybe you should hear the stories of those who lived Stoicism not just on peaceful days, but in the darkest hours of their lives. 6. Real people, real Stoicism. When Stoicism saved someone, and it might be you. There are philosophies that sound good, but only become meaningful when you see someone live by them in the very situations no one ever wants to face. And Stoicism is one of those philosophies. It doesn't need you to stand behind a podium. It only needs to be tested in a real life, full of chaos, full of contradictions, full of things far beyond your control. And it is within those lives that it has saved a few human beings. Ryan Holiday was once an arrogant young man, building his image through flashy marketing campaigns, living in applause and under the lights. But underneath it all, he was someone afraid of being forgotten, always feeling the need to be more, to stand out, to be validated, until he stumbled upon the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, not through a course, but in the early mornings where he sat and wrote down what he could not control and what he still could. He left the business of self-promotion to become a writer, quiet, steady, and deep enough to help millions begin to slow down. Tim Ferriss, the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, once thought of death as a kind of release. Too successful, too famous, too fast, and he found himself in a state that many are afraid to speak of, depression in the midst of abundance. And then, a short line from Seneca changed everything. Not long, not divine, just a reminder. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Tim began writing down his fears, line by line, layer by layer, and slowly he learned to sort life out, what to keep, what to let go. Stoicism didn't heal him overnight, but it made him step back, see clearly, and stop being a victim of his own imagination. James Stockdale was held and tortured for 7 years in war. No family, no schedule, no explanation. All he had was himself and the Stoic philosophy he had once read. No one told him to stay hopeful, and he didn't. He simply stayed conscious. He reminded himself, I don't know when I'll be released, but I won't let these men decide my dignity. He endured, not through blind hope, but through the clarity that there are things they can never take unless he gives them up himself. And then there's Tom Bradyerman, so calm it feels like time slows down when he walks onto the field. He doesn't shout, doesn't show off, doesn't exaggerate, but everyone senses something deeply grounded in him. In an interview, he called that state meditation in motion, stillness while everything else is shaking. What he found wasn't a formula for winning, but a way to remain steady through both glory and defeat. And what about you? If Stoicism has ever held a part of you together on a day too heavy, in a loss too deep to describe, in a moment that almost broke you, tell that story, because sometimes just one line shared can be the light someone else needs, wandering through the storm of their own mind. 7. Come home to yourself. Stoicism doesn't turn you into someone else. It brings you back to yourself. Have you ever tried so hard to become what others expect that you forgot who you used to be? You behave in ways that make others happy, do what you're supposed to. Hold on to the image you're meant to project. You act strong so no one worries. You pretend to be whole so no one is disappointed. And slowly, you no longer know whether what you're choosing is truly yours or just a way to be accepted. We grow up in a world full of standards. Standards for success, for morality, for love, for the ideal image of someone who is worthy. And along the way, many people move fast, but have no idea where they're going, because every path they take is built to fit someone else's expectations, not to stay true to their own soul. Stoicism doesn't promise to turn you into the ideal person. It doesn't lead you to success. It doesn't teach you how to win. It simply invites you to turn inward, where no one is watching, no one is judging, and ask a very quiet question: what's left of me when there's nothing left to prove? The Stoic doesn't live to endure. They live to awaken. They know the world outside may be powerful, but the world within them must be stronger. Not stronger with muscle, but with honesty. Not armored with appearances, but with awareness. They don't run away from emotion, don't deny fear. They simply refuse to let it define who they are. And so they learn how to stand still even if to others they may look like they have nothing at all. But through the eyes of their inner world, they know they are no longer dependent. Not on outcomes, not on praise or on the ones who leave, not on the past to prove they were worthy, not on the future to be beautiful enough for today to feel okay. Because value does not come from results. It comes from how you walk through those results with calm, with dignity, and with the ability not to lose yourself while everything around you is changing. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Or as Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in Meditations, there is no place in the world that offers true stillness like the soul you've learned to protect. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to become someone else's idea of who you should be. You only need to come home to a mind quiet enough to hear yourself again, and a heart no longer manipulated by anything beyond your reach. This is not a destination. It is a beginning for a life no longer led by fear and no longer worn down by expectation. A life that is truly yours. Through this video, you've come to understand that Stoicism doesn't teach you to become someone else. It doesn't turn you into a cold monument or an untouchable ideal. It simply brings you home to yourself with clarity, steadiness, and wholeness. You've learned how to distinguish what belongs to you and what does not. How not to react blindly to emotion, but to observe, understand, and move through it with intention. You've come to realize that stillness isn't a reward for those who meditate well, but something you can build from the smallest choices, writing down what you can control, imagining what you're afraid to lose, or simply learning to endure a little discomfort to train inner strength. You've also seen real people, those who once stood on the edge, choose Stoicism, not because it was beautiful, but because it helped them stay unbroken. And in the end, you've been reminded that value isn't found in what you achieve, but in how you preserve yourself through every possible outcome. If Stoicism has ever helped you stay grounded, even once in a moment that seemed small, then I invite you to share that below. Because maybe the story you're carrying is exactly what someone out there needs to keep going today. And if you wish to continue this journey, the journey of returning to a self that is untangled, unprovoked, and no longer worn down by expectation, then like, share, and subscribe so we can meet again. Thank you for being here. And if one day the world feels too loud, too much, too tangled, you'll know this is a place you can return to, quietly and steadily,